Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming in today, and thanks for having this hearing. Secretary Bessent, the last time you were here, I asked you about your emphasis on domestic discretionary funding in your opening statement. You had stated, quote, "We must adjust federal domestic discretionary spending to get our fiscal house in order while striking an urgent tone on our growing deficit." I mentioned to you then that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of our budget. And I think if you were serious about deficit reduction, you might not push for tax cuts that almost certainly could not be offset by discretionary adjustments alone. And now, of course, we know you can't. Today, we actually have the details of your plan. Take health care from 10 million Americans, 126,000 Coloradans, cut nutrition assistance for millions of adults, sunset clean energy investments that are so critical to the American West, give over 40% of the tax benefits of this bill to the top 5%. And it's not even close to being paid for. Even my colleagues on the Republican side, who for years and years and years have claimed to be the fiscally responsible party, now are admitting that it's not paid for. This bill adds another $2.4 trillion to our national debt. It will push the deficit to GDP ratio up to 7%, which you said when you were here before was unsustainable, far from the 3% target that you described. If you look at your proposals taken together, there is no getting around the fact. There is no getting around the fact that the richest Americans receive an average tax cut of $300,000, which again, we're not paying for with the discretionary cuts that you advertise. So once again, we will have to borrow money in order to assist the people in this country who least need a tax cut at this moment, while the Americans who have been made miserable by the economy that they're in actually see income reduced because of cuts to Medicaid and cuts to SNAP. Meanwhile, and I think, Mr. Chairman, this is really important, meanwhile, interest rates are at 20-year highs. Moody's has slashed our credit rating because of the fiscal irresponsibility of this administration. The World Bank has cut our growth estimates in half, and the bond markets are screaming at us to stop. We now pay, and we are paying this year, more in interest than we are in the national defense. Secretary Bessent, how can you square your concern with fiscal health with deficit finance growth for families that need those tax cuts least?
Welcome back to America First, Patriots. I'm your host, and we're diving into some crucial footage from Capitol Hill today. Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe in putting America and American workers first. We need your support to keep bringing you the truth that the mainstream media won't tell you. Today, we're looking at Treasury Secretary Bessent getting absolutely grilled by a Democrat senator over the administration's fiscal policies. And folks, what we're witnessing here is exactly why Americans voted for change on November 5th. This senator is throwing around accusations and completely misrepresenting what's actually happening with our economy and tax policy.
Senator, I'll begin with that we did not get here. We inherited this fiscal situation that I believe.
Well, you inherited from Donald Trump, who was here. You did, Mr. Bessent.
No,
yes,
sir.
you did, Mr. Bessent. You inherited from Donald Trump. He's the first president to come back after a 4-year hiatus, after we know exactly what the last tax cuts did, which was blow a massive hole in our deficit and debt. You can't sit here and lie about that. It's true. The data, to coin a phrase, the data shows that that's the result. The math shows that that is the result. No one on this side of the aisle admits anymore that or claims anymore that they didn't blow a huge hole in the deficit. They did. And now you're here saying to the American people, let's double down on that. We're going to give tax cuts for the wealthy. We are going to give tax cuts again to the wealthiest people in America, and we are going to finance it on the backs of the sons and daughters of teachers and firefighters and police officers all over this country because we can't pay for it. Because the Treasury Secretary discovered somehow that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of the budget, and therefore you can't balance it there.
Well, sir, we had a referendum on November 5th.
You certainly did. I agree with
policies. Your side lost.
I agree with that.
And a higher decibel level.
And I'm a rare Democrat who doesn't blame Donald Trump for winning. I'm sad he won. I don't blame him for winning. But don't come here.
In your statements,
go ahead.
They have veracity.
Go ahead, Mr. Secretary. What?
Higher decibel level does not give your statements more veracity.
My statements are true, if that's the word, if that's what you mean by veracity. My statements are true. You blew a massive hole in the deficit when your predecessor was sitting here under Donald Trump. And so the question is, can't we think of something better to do with the money than this debt, than drive up interest rates by borrowing money from our kids so the richest people in America can get a tax cut when they don't need it? That is the reality of your plan.
Well, sir, actually the high interest rates were achieved during the Biden administration in October of 2023, and we have not touched those rates since then. So
the high interest rates.
No, your statement's incorrect.
I'm out of time, and I appreciate the indulgence of the chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Let me break down what's really going on here. First, this senator claims that giving tax relief to American families and businesses somehow only benefits the wealthy. This is the same tired talking point we've heard for decades from the left. When you let people keep more of their own money, that stimulates economic growth across all income levels. The wealthy already pay the vast majority of federal income taxes in this country. So naturally, when you cut taxes across the board, they see larger dollar amounts simply because they're paying more to begin with. The senator talks about borrowing money to fund tax cuts. But here's what he's not telling you. Tax cuts historically lead to increased economic activity, which generates more tax revenue in the long run. The Laffer curve isn't just economic theory. It's been proven time and again. When Ronald Reagan cut taxes in the 1980s, federal revenues actually increased because the economy grew so dramatically. Now, let's address this claim about health care being taken away from 10 million Americans. This is classic Democrat fear-mongering. What we're talking about is reforming programs that have become bloated and inefficient under decades of government mismanagement. When you streamline these programs and eliminate waste, you can actually provide better services for people who truly need them while reducing the burden on taxpayers. The senator mentions cuts to nutrition assistance. But again, we're talking about reforms that ensure these programs serve their intended purpose rather than becoming permanent dependency traps. Work requirements and accountability measures aren't cruel, they're common sense. We want to help people get back on their feet, not keep them dependent on government handouts for life. Here's something particularly revealing about this exchange. The senator admits that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of the federal budget, yet he's fighting tooth and nail to prevent any cuts to it. Meanwhile, he's completely ignoring the elephant in the room, which is mandatory spending on entitlements that's driving our debt crisis. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid make up the majority of federal spending. But Democrats refuse to have an honest conversation about reforming these programs to ensure they're sustainable for future generations. The senator brings up interest rates being at 20-year highs, and he's absolutely right about that. But here's what he conveniently leaves out. Those high interest rates are the direct result of the massive government spending and money printing that happened during the previous administration's response to COVID and their subsequent inflationary policies. The Federal Reserve had to raise rates aggressively to combat the inflation that was crushing working families across America. When Secretary Bessent mentions that we inherited this fiscal situation, he's being diplomatic, but let's be honest about what really happened. The previous administration's spending spree, from the so-called Inflation Reduction Act to the massive infrastructure bill that was loaded with green energy boondoggles, created the inflationary environment we're still dealing with today. The senator's comment about clean energy investments being critical to the American West reveals exactly what's wrong with Washington's priorities. These aren't investments. They're subsidies to politically connected companies that can't compete in the free market. Meanwhile, we're telling coal miners, oil workers, and natural gas employees that their jobs don't matter because we need to appease the climate change lobby. Here's the fundamental difference between conservative and liberal approaches to fiscal policy. Conservatives believe that economic growth comes from unleashing productive capacity of the American people through lower taxes, reduced regulations, and free market competition. Liberals believe that government spending and redistribution programs drive economic growth. History has shown us which approach actually works. The senator talks about borrowing money from our kids, and he's right that deficit spending is a serious problem. But the solution isn't higher taxes that strangle economic growth. The solution is cutting wasteful government spending, eliminating redundant agencies, and getting the federal government out of areas where it has no business being involved in the first place. What we saw in this hearing is a perfect example of why Americans are fed up with Washington politics, as usual. Instead of working with the new administration to find solutions that actually help working families, this senator is more interested in scoring political points and defending the failed policies that got us into this mess in the first place. The American people delivered a clear mandate on November 5th. They want lower taxes, less government interference in their lives, and policies that put American workers and American interests first. Secretary Bessent understands this mandate, and that's exactly what he's working to deliver. The bond markets that the senator mentions aren't screaming at us to raise taxes. They're concerned about the sustainability of our fiscal trajectory, which requires both spending discipline and pro-growth policies that expand the tax base through economic expansion rather than higher tax rates. This entire exchange perfectly illustrates why we need term limits in Congress. Career politicians like this senator have been in Washington so long that they've completely lost touch with what actually drives economic prosperity. They think the answer to every problem is more government spending funded by higher taxes on productive Americans. Patriots, this is why your vote matters and why we need to stay engaged in the political process. The establishment in both parties will fight against America First policies every step of the way, because those policies threaten their power and their ability to use your tax dollars to buy votes and reward their political allies. The facts are clear. Lower taxes, reduce regulations, and America First trade policies create jobs, increase wages, and strengthen our economy. Everything else is just political theater designed to distract you from the real solutions that will make America prosperous again. That's all for today's video, Patriots. Make sure to like this video if you support putting American workers first. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and let me know in the comments what you think about this heated exchange on Capitol Hill. Until next time, keep fighting for America.